All right, so we want to thank you for coming out today. We've been working on this process. Definitely Father and Tom and I, since we arrived in 2019, the process had actually started with Father Al and his team back in 2018. And so we've been working towards the point where we could gather together like this. And of course, COVID made it very difficult for us to do this. So this has been our first opportunity to gather. And what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about where we are today and what you have told us in terms of your opinions and your perspective in those surveys that we did recently. We'll talk a little bit about how we got to the point we are today. We had a task force that looked at everything that we have, all of the buildings that our parish owns, and so we'll talk a little bit about the results they have. Pastoral Council and Finance Council have been consulting with us and giving us their opinions on all of this information, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, we'll have an opportunity to ask you questions to see what your opinions are. And then also to give you a chance to ask us questions as well. There are index cards in the aisles and little pencils. So what we'll ask is that, during the presentation, if you have a question, jot it down. And after we get through the little questions we'll ask you, then we're going to be collecting all of those and gathering them together so that we can see what the questions being asked are so that we can try and answer them here tonight. We know that some people weren't able to make it yesterday or today, so our plan is to put this presentation out on our website, along with opportunities for folks to answer the same questions that you're going to answer today, and along with the opportunity for folks to ask questions the same way you're going to be able to ask questions today. So if you know anybody who wasn't able to come to any of our assemblies, please encourage them to keep an eye out on the website. We'll announce when it's out there, and hopefully that'll give more folks a chance to engage in the process, to give us the opportunity to hear their opinions and to give us the opportunity to hear the kinds of questions they're asking. So as we begin this afternoon, I'm going to ask Father Tom to start us off with an opening prayer.
You'd have to be growing up in a turnip patch to not know that this is going to be a tough day. I can speak, I've lost sleep, and at times Father Larry, he'd text me at 3 in the morning. I know he's lost sleep, and I'm going to probably say something that you probably won't believe, but I believe it's true. You know who's one of the saddest people, about what's going on is our own Bishop Zubik. He has a pastor's heart, a shepherd's heart, and I would think if we had another 1 million Catholics or so, then we wouldn't be in some of the situation that we find ourselves in anyway. So whatever you're kind of thinking of the bishop, the Lord always does command us to love one another, so please pray for him. His back is so bent. It just seems at times I just think it's carrying some of the weight of the world. Before my dad died, he was 95. The doctor had told my brother and I what was going on, and somebody said, well, who's going to tell Dad? And I said, I would tell Dad. Inoperable tumor, few weeks to live. I told my dad, and here's what he said, it's one of those things. I said, boy, talk about just kind of, it's life. It's life, it's life. It's one of those things. There's so many things in life, it's one of those things. I remember one of the people that I buried, he was 8 years old. His name, he had everything wrong with him, this little guy. It was when I first began at St. Joseph's in O'Hara Township, everything wrong, except this little guy brought a family together that was so opposed and so angry with each other. He couldn't really focus his eyes on whatever. Little Alex Fallon, he made such a difference. God uses everything for God's purposes. Everything. And God can make a difference. I'm moving into the prayer. I just asked if, in a sense, either two images. Here we are at the Ascension. Either if we can imagine ourselves in the cenacle with all of the apostles awaiting for the Holy Spirit, to see ourselves there begging for the Holy Spirit to come to really to empower us and to see God's vision and God's hope, not just here before the Blessed Sacrament, that we're in the cenacle, or a place that I find myself every night at St. Bart's. I stand underneath the cross and hold the cross, that if we could be with Mary under the cross with her son. And so if we can, in my mind, if we can kind of do that and put it, all of this in the context of, okay, God, here's the lemons that we were given, help us to make the lemonade, or here's the predicament that we find ourselves in May of 2021. Help us, give us the wisdom. And so I'll just pray the prayer that was on my ordination card that I just talked about at Mass, and that's, Father, I abandon myself into your hands. Do with me what you will. Whatever you do, I thank you. I am ready for all. I accept all. I ask only this, O Lord, that into your hands I commend my soul. For I love you, Lord, and need to give myself to you, and with boundless confidence, for you are my Father. And this still is the month of May, so if we can, my little prayer part will end with, we'll say the Hail Mary together. Ask Our Lady of Wisdom to help us. Hail Mary. Grace. The Lord is with you.
Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, Father Tom. Joining us today is the regional vicar for the entire southern half of the diocese. Father Joe Scioli comes to this position with, boy, I don't even know how many years of experience you have, a bunch. Father Joe was my first pastor when I was first ordained. So I've known Father Joe for a number of years, and I think we're really lucky to have him as regional vicar. So we've asked him to step up and just offer some opening comments for us. Father Joe?
I take no responsibility for this man and his formation. No, thanks, Father Larry and Father Tom, for leading us in prayer for the introduction. I just want to offer a brief, introduction to myself a little further. As Father Larry mentioned, I'm the bishop's regional vicar for our South Vicariate. So our vicariate system, which originally was 4, was restructured just to include now 2 vicariates. So basically, the whole southern half of the diocese is my responsibility. And what that is actually, what my office is to represent the bishop to the parish communities, the clergy, really to the whole church in this part of the diocese, sort of as his ambassador. And similarly, to bring back to the bishop, of course, the needs and the concerns of our communities and people. And that's the reason why I'm here today. I'm not here, to offer much more. Your parish staff, including your clergy, have done a very fine job in leading this process and bringing together the presentation that you're about to hear. As it's already been recognized, these are difficult decisions, again, to contemplate. It's a difficult discernment, but we do it in faith and trust. And as Father Tom mentioned very kindly and very sincerely, our bishop, Bishop Zubik, is deeply concerned. And that's why I'm here with Dr. Ritzer. She's going to also offer some comments, some context, as well as some observations. The two of us work very closely out in our parish communities, and the two of us also work very closely with our bishop. And so my presence here, as well as Dr. Ritzer's, is to be able to bring back to the bishop, your own thoughts and feelings, as well as the ongoing needs of this parish community. And so in that, it really is a joy for me to be able to come. And it's also a kind of a cool thing, really, to be able to offer you, our bishop's prayers and to bring you his greeting as well, because you're very close to his heart. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and just introduce myself, and I think Father Larry's going to introduce briefly Dr. Ritzer.
Thanks, Father Joe. So our diocese, in terms of the staff that supports the operations of the diocese, who gives us support in the things that we need as parishes, it's organized in terms of secretariats. And one of the secretariats is that of parish services. And what they do is, when we need advice, when we need guidance, we reach out to them, and they help us. They organize information for us. When we need a helping hand, they're there for us. And Dr. Linda Ritzer is the secretary of that Secretariat for Parish Services. In that group, there is a representative that comes from that department, from that secretariat. There is a representative who is assigned to each and every parish. And Dr. Ritzer is also our representative. So we've been working closely with her over the past couple of years to help us navigate through the process of merging from 5 predecessor parishes to 1. And now, as we think about what the future will look like for our parish and how we'll be able to work our way through it, we've been leaning on Dr. Ritzer and her secretariat pretty heavily. So I'd like to ask Dr. Ritzer to come forward and just offer a few words to help us get a little context to what we've been doing.
Thank you, Father Larry, and good afternoon. Just very briefly to remind everyone that in 2015, Bishop Zubik initiated the On Mission for the Church Alive initiative. And in 2018, the 5 parishes of your former grouping, now your new parish, really began in earnest, remember, the merger process. So you've been at this for a while, and I have had the privilege of working with this group since that time, and just want to laud you for your willingness to come together, for your commitment to continue to grow this new parish, and for the faith that you bring that inspires many, even more than you know. What I'd like for us just to hold on to today as we go through this next step of looking at structure again, and in particular looking at the buildings that will best serve the mission and ministry of this parish going forward, is Bishop Zubik's vision from the beginning. It really was on his heart when he initiated On Mission for the Church Alive to inspire in every single parish vibrancy and growth, that all of us together would really take our baptismal call, as Father Tom so beautifully expressed today at Mass this afternoon at noon, to take that love for the Lord Jesus out to the world. That's our call, and everything we do today is really focused on that work, ultimately, that we together can make a difference and bring hope to God's holy people. So thank you for your attendance, your commitment, and your desire to really serve and grow this new parish. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Ritzer. Our entire parish staff has been working pretty hard on this project, to try to bring everything together, to try to understand where we are and where we're trying to head. One of the key members on our team is one of our pastoral associates, Bess Biamonte. You might know Bess Biamonte from her former role at St. Bartholomew Parish, or you might have seen her around in her current role at Christ the Divine Shepherd. There are 2 questions that people ask me all the time. What in the world have you guys been up to over the past 2 years? Why is this taking so long? And then, where do we go from here? And I thought that Bess, in her role as pastoral associate and in the efforts she's been making, would be the perfect person to talk a little bit about that process. What have we been doing over the past couple of years, and where do we go from here? What does the process look like from here? So I'd like to ask Bess to come up right now and speak a little to those topics.
Thank you, Father Larry, and thank you for Father Tom also for giving me this job, trusting me that I will be an integral part of the leadership of this wonderful faith community to ensure that we move ahead with faith and fidelity and success. We're going to wait for the bells. We are not in this alone. We are all in this together with the entire Diocese of Pittsburgh. And so I have been spearheading with a wonderful group of faithful parishioners, and they are our resource task force. So we have been going through the procedure of evaluating all of our buildings, and we have been diligently using this manual. And the process that we have been going through is under the umbrella of canon law, and that is the law that guards and guides our entire Catholic Church. The Resource Task Force is one component of the examination that we have been under for multiple years. In October of 2020, the Resource Task Force was chosen with one person from any one of our legacy parishes. And the reason why they were chosen is because of their love and fidelity to our faith. They worked very diligently over several months, going over all 20 of the separate buildings that Christ the Divine Shepherd owns. And we followed all of those steps. There are 19 steps that we needed to go through. And as of today, we are into step 16. So they looked carefully and prayerfully at how we can best serve all of the souls of Pitcairn and Monroeville and Penn Hills. So the Diocese of Pittsburgh is very complex, and I say this frequently. Many of us think, well, we have a parish, we have a pastor, and then there's the bishop. But there's so many other people in a cascade woven together that help guide us and, bring us closer to Christ. And we need all of these components. So we have relied heavily on two different areas in the diocese with this resource task force. And they have been the departments of property and planning and also facilities and management. And they've been able to assist us. And so I want to tell you how carefully and all of the different components that the resource task force went through to come to this recommendation. They did not come up with a final decision, but they came up with a recommendation. The parish council, the finance council, and of course the clergy team were all working in this together to come up with a recommendation of how to grow our church in this eastern portion of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. So the diocese is responsible for every single soul, but they're also responsible, in essence, for every single building in all of the counties that comprise our diocese. And so I did this last night. I tested the last group. If you remember, we prayed for several years the On Mission prayer. And so the diocese is responsible for all of the buildings in Allegheny, pray with me, Beaver, Butler, Greene, Lawrence, and Washington counties. And so for all of those parishes that are going under this same process as we are going through, it's all the same. It's a standardized approach. So they had commissioned a group called the Canon Design, and this is C-A-N-N-O-N. There's a designation where you're going to use those two terms, and I don't want you to get confused. Canon Law and Canon Design. And so the Canon Design firm, which is an architectural firm, in 2016 looked at every single building in all 6 of those counties and then generated a report for each one of those specific parishes and the buildings that they had. So the objective was to provide a snapshot of current conditions of the facilities and also identify any problems that were occurring in any of those facilities. We need a place to gather and worship, and the sacraments will occur. And so we are making sure that we provide the very best of those environments for us to continue on our faith. So the Canon Design Report helps to manage the assets that we have for the long term. So they gave in 2016 a 5-year projection and also a 10-year projection. And so we're already into that. First 5 years has been completed, and now we're looking at all of those statistics that they gave us, which are now the 10-year. And so these are some of the things that were the tools that the Resource Task Force used. They had a lot of information. They had to synthesize through many, many documents, and they did a really good, hard job. So the Canon Design Report gives us these aids to be able to look behind the walls. We see what we can see, but what's important for us is to know how sustainable our buildings are and what we cannot see. And so that's what the snapshot of Canon Design did for us. So they looked at exteriors first: roofs, walls, windows, exterior doors, and structural components. Then they came in and they looked at the interior systems, those things that we see all around us: the walls, the doors, the floors, the ceilings, the visible structures, and the finishes. They looked at the HVAC, the heating, and the ventilation and air conditioning systems. They looked at the electrical systems and the electrical distribution. They also looked at plumbing, fire protection, and what the civil site is: the property, the driveways, the parking lots. Through their expertise, then, they looked at where we had deficiencies and how we needed to address these deficiencies that would be occurring. They prioritized the deficiencies from 1 to 4, meaning 1 means that they were immediately needed to be attended to. And 4 gave us a time span that at the end of those 10 years, when they did the evaluation, which is now the end of the next 5 years, these things that must be done in order that we can have a safe environment, not just for a plain old building, but we can have a safe environment where worship and sacraments and fellowship and the Eucharist will continue to occur. So kudos to the Resource Task Force. They looked at all of that. We also gave them the financial summaries of each one of the predecessor parishes, which we'll see that today. We also got an asbestos report. Our buildings are old. So we saw which buildings were tested that had asbestos, and then where that asbestos was found, when remediation occurred, and how that process unfolded. We looked at the cost analysis, the demographics, and how does all of this lead us into being able to have a wonderful space where Christ, through his sacraments, comes and remains with us. So again, congratulations to any of those people that are here from the Resource Task Force. We do have a few of them. Would you like to stand? And also, we would like to have any of the current pastoral council and finance council members that are here to also stand to, commend them for their hard work.
Thanks, Bess. So to sum up, we received lots of information from the diocese. Our task force evaluated the states of all of our buildings. We consulted with pastoral council and finance council. We brought the information to them. We asked them for their opinions of it and what their recommendations for how we should move forward would be. Father Tom and I then have taken those recommendations and have been praying and discerning over them to come up with a proposed recommendation. And then, of course, you're going to provide your input as well. And after we've gathered all of that input from our parish family, Father Tom and I will again discern through all of that and come up with a proposal that we will send to the bishop, right? Who will then turn around and provide a decision and announce a decision to us. So that's kind of the process that we're going through. A month or two ago, we sent a newsletter out in the mail to every registered parishioner of Christ the Divine Shepherd Parish. And in that newsletter, we announced our Easter schedule. We talked a little bit about the situation that we found ourselves in. And then we asked you what you thought of all of this information. And so there was a survey there. And so there were opportunities to go out to the internet, to our website, and to fill out the survey there. There was a paper form, and I know a lot of folks filled out that paper form. Maybe they sent it to us or put it in with their envelopes, their weekly envelopes, and put it in the basket or mailed it in. We got back over 250 responses, and we think that's about 10 to 20% of our parish base. And so we think that what we got was a really good representation of what you as our parish family are thinking. And we wanted to share those results with you today. In that survey, we asked 3 questions. First of all, it's been really tough during the pandemic to communicate with everybody. We were locked down for a while, and then when we came back to in-person Mass, people have been coming back slowly as they become more and more comfortable with it. And so it's been a trying situation to make sure we could communicate with everybody. So we wanted to know, how is the best way for us to communicate with you? Then we asked you for your take on the information in the parish newsletter. So given the information that we provided, what was your understanding of how sustainable our situation is in the parish? And then finally, given all of that, what did you think our best use of the limited resources that we have might be? We also solicited some comments where you could just write whatever was on your mind, and you did, and it was great. So we want to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that you told us as well. Our first question was, how can we best communicate with you? And we provided, if you can see there are 6 groupings here, we provided 6 different ways of communicating. Do you want to hear from us on the website, or to send you text messages? Do you like using Facebook? Is the bulletin your favorite? Do you prefer that we email you? And we also said, are there other ways to reach out to you? What we found was that the bulletin and email are your favorite ways for us to communicate with you, far and above any others. If you can see the 2 tall lines, the blue lines, that's showing us that you picked bulletin and email as the absolute best ways to communicate with you. When we asked we had about 16 folks who said, you know what, the best way to communicate with me is sending me a letter through the U.S. mail. That becomes a bit difficult, right? We have 5,000 families on our rolls, and if you can imagine the cost of just stamps to send out 5,000 pieces of mail, it's a difficult thing to do. But we hear that some folks say mail is the absolute best, so that's a good piece of information for us to have. In terms of the options, remember we said 1 to 6, best to worst, and we also had one choice that said, this is not an option for me. And so about 25, 26 folks said, guys, I don't use Facebook. You put the live stream on Facebook, I'm not going to see it. You put information on Facebook, I'm not going to see it. And so, 25 out of 5,000 families isn't huge, but it's significant. And it's a good data point for us to know when we're putting information out there, how should we do it? Okay? We then turn to what you thought of the information we provided. And we wanted to ask you, You know, we presented some financial information that showed some of the stresses that we're facing as a parish. And we asked you, what is your understanding of the sustainability of the situation that our parish finds itself in? And almost 3/4 of you said, yes, you need to take immediate action in order to create a situation in this parish that makes us stable and sustainable. Another 1/4 of the responses said, I'm really not sure. But I want you to hold on to that thought for a second, because when we see the next question, I think the outlook becomes more clear. Literally, out of the over 250 answers we got, only about 4 people said, no, it's great. There's nothing to worry about, man. Just keep going. Yeah, we're fine. No worries. So there was a pretty clear indication that folks were telling us, yeah, there's something, we got to do something, right? We can't just sit on our laurels. But what about the fact that it was only 3/4, that there wasn't consensus? Well, take a look at question 3. When we ask the question this way, how do we use our limited resources? One of the ways we put out there was to say, should we just keep running a deficit? Should we just keep spending our money on the 6 sites until we totally run out of money? Now, if you notice, there were 3 answers plus another not an option. Green shows the folks who said, yes, that's the best option possible. Yellow shows, I think that's an okay option. Red said, oh my goodness, that's the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. And the blue one says, that isn't even a valid option, man. So you see the one on the left, keep running a deficit, keep paying for 6 buildings until you run out of money. Almost no one said that was a good idea. Almost everyone said that was the worst idea gone, or it's not even an option, but it gets better than that. About 80 out of the 250 people who responded didn't mark anything for that one. It's almost as if they were saying, are you seriously asking me that? No, I'm going to show you what I think is the good thing to do. I'm not even dignifying that option with a response. So when we saw that 3 out of 4 people said, I think you need immediate action, and 1 out of 4 said, I'm not sure, everyone seemed to be on the same page. We can't keep doing what we're doing. We won't survive. So then we asked, okay, how do you think we should use our resources? And we provided 2 options based on things that we commonly hear you say. One of them is, look, we have to provide a way to minister to youth and to young adults, right? To those children and high school students and perhaps college students among us who still participate in our liturgies and are active, and to reach out to those young adults who have left the practice of the faith. The other one that we asked was, well, should we spend all of our resources on ministry and evangelization to the parish at large, as a whole? Both of them got a lot of positive response. The one that got more was the response that said, yes, we need to use our resources. Rather than spending it on maintenance and operations of buildings, we need to spend it on ministry to the parish family, on evangelizing the parish family. A lot of folks also said, you can't forget about the youth. And so those 2 showed up pretty strongly as the directions that you thought we should be spending our resources on. And so as Father Tom and I read through that, we realized, aha, we're beginning to come to a consensus as a parish family. So just to review, for communications, you love the bulletin, you like email. If you want us to communicate with you through email, we instituted the Flocknote service, okay? And if you're not yet signed up for Flocknote, I would encourage you to pick up a bulletin outside on the way out. It tells you what website to go to and how to sign up. And if you sign up for Flocknote, then we will be able to send you emails. So the same way we put information in the bulletin, we'll be able to send you information through Flocknote. So if you were one of the folks who said, yeah, email is good for me, please take the opportunity to sign up for Flocknote. And we mentioned also that generally speaking, folks are aware that something has to give, that we have to do something at this point in time. What about the free-form comments, though? When you had the opportunity to just write in a comment, what did you want to tell us? Well, we saw 3 comments that by and large were shared by a lot of people. First of all, you told us, look, we realize that building closures are necessary. Secondly, you said, maybe it would be sufficient to have one building in Monroeville and one building in Penn Hills. And thirdly, you said, guys, rip the Band-Aid off. Do it now. We can't afford to keep waiting. In general, everybody settled on some combination of those 3. Then when it came to asking the question or answering the question, which building should stay open, well, everybody chose different answers. Because of course, we are all from 6 different church buildings and everybody loves their church. For crying out loud, it's the place where your kids got baptized. It might be the place where you got married. We each love our church building. We realize there's something we need to do, and now we need to find a way to move forward in a way that keeps us solvent and able to minister to you, and is still sensitive to the needs of the larger community. How did we get here, though? When we were talking to Pastoral and Finance Council, they looked at me and they said, look, Father Larry, I know you're a numbers guy. I know you love talking dollars and cents. You cannot talk dollars and cents all day to these folks. Their eyes will glaze over and they'll fall asleep. And it sounded like the best idea ever. So let's talk about people. Let's talk about us as this parish community in Monroeville and Penn Hills and Pitcairn. We asked the diocese for some help. We asked them to give us some information. And we said, let's start with 2011, because that's when St. Michael's became part of our community with NAM. And let's show data all the way up to the end of 2019. Because we didn't want to go into 2020. That was COVID land, right? The data from COVID probably is not going to be as good and as representative. So we said, let's look at a decade from 2011 through the end of 2019, and let's ask 2 questions. First of all, how many people have been attending our masses during that decade? And then secondly, what do our church populations look like? Our parish, is it growing or is it shrinking, and what does that trend look like? So the diocese came back and gave us the information, and here's what they showed us. In 2011, on an average weekend, over 4,500 people would come to Mass at our 6 churches. These are the October counts. You know how we would always say in October, we count the number of people coming and that gives us our basis for understanding? Okay, so in 2011, there were 4,700 people who came to Mass in our 6 churches. By the time we reached 2018, we were able to report to you that that was down to 3,000 people. Remember when we had our last assemblies? And we said 3,000 people come to all of our masses? There we go. At the end of 2018, we were down to 3,000. But now that we could look at 2019, we see that it has decreased even further. So if you look at this as a whole, we can say that from 2011 to 2019, almost half fewer people come to Mass. Our churches are half as full as they were a decade ago. And I'm betting I don't need to tell you that, because if you've been going to Mass in our churches over the past 10, 20, 30 years, you can remember when on any given Sunday it was pretty full. You had to get here at quarter till or else you weren't going to get your pew, right? But before COVID hit, even before we went to this every other pew or every third pew, people were sitting every other pew, every third pew, right? We don't nearly have the same number of folks coming to weekend masses as we used to. And I think that's an important consideration for us to keep in mind when we ask the question, how do we best provide ministry for the people of our parish? So then we asked the diocese, okay, but those are people going to masses. How about overall? How about our overall church population? Is it growing or is it shrinking? And what they said was, okay, let's compare the number of baptisms to the number of deaths. Because when you take that as a ratio, you're going to be able to say, am I growing? Am I shrinking? What's going on with the people in our parish? And here's the numbers they gave us, and let me explain this a little bit. You see where that changes from red to green? That's right about the number 1, right? If we were at 1, that would mean that for every one baptized, someone is passing away. We're in equilibrium. We're neither growing nor shrinking. And the farther down in the green you go, it means the more we're growing. By that token, the further up you go into the red, it means it's the faster that you're shrinking. So we see that in 2011, we were already in the red. We were already shrinking, right? And so for every person who was baptized, right, there was somewhere between 1 and 2 people who we were burying. Now we look at it at 2019, and the number has been growing steadily. By the end of 2019, for every 1 person baptized, more than 3 people are being buried. That 3-to-1 ratio is kind of telling us the story. Our demographics are shrinking. Not only are fewer people coming to Mass, but there are fewer people in our community as a whole. And it's a pretty important and sobering statistic for us to consider when we think about what are the needs of the parish and how can we address them. Let's go over a couple of the things that we talked about in the bulletin. These are things that you've seen before. You've seen it in the newsletter. We talked about where our finances are. The 2 that are in red are the things you've seen already, right? Last year, in terms of donations and such, we brought in $1.35 million. And in terms of our expenses, we spent $1.7 million, right? Now, if you notice, the bottom line there says $1.6 million. That's because the federal government gave us a PPP loan. And by the end of the year, they had totally forgiven that amount. It was free money. The federal government literally threw $250,000 in our laps and said, have fun. And even though we got that $250,000, we were still in the hole by $100,000. If it had been a normal year, the figures in red, then we would have lost $350,000 last year. Now here's the thing, running a parish isn't a whole lot different than you running your family expenses. So let me ask you this question. Let's suppose you look at your budget for a month and you see that you brought in this amount of money and you spent that amount of money. How are you going to make up that difference? There's only one way to do it. It comes out of your checking account or it comes out of your savings, right? And that's the situation that we're in. You see it in the bulletin every week. We provide those numbers every week, right? Our collections are here, our expenses are here. So every week we're taking money out of the checking account to cover the balance, right? Last year, that difference, if it were an ordinary year, if we hadn't had the government throw money at us, that difference would have been $350,000. This year, we've done estimates, and we think that number is going to be $330,000. Now, here's the thing. Eventually, our checking account and our savings are going to run out. And if we draw over $300,000 a year out of them on a constant basis, it's only going to take us a few years, maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years, before we're dead broke. And at that point, we're unable to pay our bills, right? That's what the numbers are showing us. We're also showing the loan that we have, and let me draw the distinction here. On one hand, it's the operations. It's your normal monthly budget. How much are you spending? How much are you bringing in? On the other hand, there's the debt. And our parishes, when we combined, had debt from a number of sources. There was some construction debt that was there. There were back taxes that hadn't been being paid, and yes, we pay taxes just like you. There was insurance that we hadn't paid in our parishes. And so all told, it was almost $1.2 million in debt. Over and above the fact that we're bleeding $330,000 a year, there's debt. Now, do you remember last year we put in the bulletin and we said, maybe we should pay off some of this debt. There was debt that was sitting there that we really need to pay off, salaries that we never covered, and we asked, would you mind, what we're thinking of doing is taking money out of that campaign for the Church Alive and using it to pay off some of our debt. But the diocese came to us and said, hang on a second, hang on, I got a better idea for you. The diocese said, how about if we take all of your debts and we bring them all together. We restructure your debt and just put it into one big loan. I thought, all right, not a bad idea. They said, no, wait, we've got more for you. Once we bring it all together, let's get rid of the interest on all of it. You will not be continuing to accrue interest. Let's put this loan together, and it just stays at that number. It never gets any bigger. And we thought, wow, that's pretty awesome news. Thank you. And they said, well, you think that's good? We got another one for you. How about if we defer payments for a couple of years? And Father Tom and I thought this was the best thing we had heard in ages. So right now our situation is our savings remain. We didn't pull money out of them in 2020. And instead, we created this loan, which is up about $1.2 million. And in a couple of years, we're going to start paying back on it. Right? So that's our situation as a parish, both debt and operationally in terms of our month-to-month numbers. We showed this graph in the bulletin, I believe. We definitely showed it in the newsletter. This is kind of a what-if graph, right? So if you look at it going from left to right, we're asking the question, what if we owned a certain number of buildings? The truth is, we're right over on the left, right? We owned 6 buildings last year. And so on the $1.35 million that we actually brought in, our costs were really $1.7 million. But okay, what if? What if we had only owned 5 buildings last year? What if we had only owned 4 buildings? What if we had owned only 1 building? And what we found was, way over at the right side here, even if we had only owned 1 building, we still didn't bring in enough revenue to support that building. We were still in the red. Now, when people have asked me about this, I've explained it this way. Suppose I came to you and said, you know, my transportation costs are really getting out of hand. What should I do? Oh, I know what I should do. I should drive less. And then say, but you know, I really do love my 6 cars. And of course, you would tell me, Father Larry, 6 cars? Dude, that means you have 6 car payments. That means you have 6 insurance payments every month. That means that you have to get 6 inspections and all that maintenance, and you've got a 6-car garage that you're taking care of. What are you thinking? You see, that's our situation. Our problem isn't the cost of celebrating a Mass. Our problem is the cost of owning all the buildings. And so as we look at this, we say to ourselves, we are not in a good situation right now owning 6 buildings. If we want to envision a future that is more stable, we have to think about how we move along that line and come to a place where our revenue, the green line, comes up to our expenses, the red line. As we said, we had the task force do this amazing job of taking a look at all of our buildings, right? They mentioned to us that there were 20 buildings. And last night, people asked us, what do you mean 20 buildings? How do you have 20 buildings? Well, think about it. It's not just churches at the 6 sites. It's rectories and offices. It's convents. It's school buildings. There are some properties that we have. We have a house that we rent out on one of our properties. So, you know, they went and looked at all of our buildings. And so I wanted to ask Bess to come up and talk a little bit about how the task force went about their job of evaluating our properties.
As you can see on this chart, all of those different subcategories with all of the extra ancillary guides and information that the task force had on hand, they evaluated all of those buildings, and especially when we're thinking about the churches, we have 4 different components. We have worship, impact on ministry, of course we have to have that financial component, and the location. So I want to emphasize that the work of the task force was not to rank each and every one of these sites, but was to give them a fair and equitable rating using all of these other standards and criteria. And so I held up that binder for you, and that is the procedure that the Diocese of Pittsburgh has given us as a wonderful guide. So for each one of those subsections, then there was, a whole laundry list of what those comprised. So the first one we look at is our buildings and how they enhance our worship. And because that's our job as the faithful baptized Catholics, our job is worship. And our job is to be at the Eucharistic celebration. That is the source and summit of who we are. So they have given us a 35% weighted measure on how do our buildings enable worship. Meaning, is there a tabernacle? Are there places for reconciliation rooms? Is there a bride room? What does the altar look like? Or is the ambry, and we see that over there to your left of where the holy oils are. These are all these important components of our faith and our sacramental life and our worship. And do these buildings have those components for us to fully live out our Catholic faith? Then we have the impact on ministry. This is not the only place where ministry occurs. Father Tom said so beautifully, and we listened to the scriptures, that we are given that command, not the suggestion, the command to go out and spread the gospel everywhere. So ministry has to happen in more than one space. And the impact on ministry is the second highest grading, that we know very simply, without the priesthood, without our clergy, we have no Eucharist. So we have to provide for those clergy that are ministering to us so that we can together minister to more. They need a place to live. We need to have a rectory maintained. We also need places where community occurs, where we come together with fellowship. Is there space to be able to do that? Are there places to teach and catechize other than if a school building is on the premises? So that there's an impact on how we do ministry, not just where we do it, but how that spreads out. That cascading effect, I keep using that word, cascading effect. There's an impact of ministry, and there needs to be physical plants and places to be able to do that. Of course, the finances are a component of that. We have to live within a temporal means. And the fourth category, which is 15% of the weighted ratings and scores, is where we are. How do our worshipers get to us? Are we on a bus line? Do we have adequate places for them to park? What is the distance that they have to go? Again, it is the location. Are we in a neighborhood? Are we in a growing and safe neighborhood? Are we in a business district? We have to look at the locality. And so all of these come together to see how we can best serve every soul within our parish boundary. And now we're going to see how this all came out. The Father's going to guide us now in these beautiful pie charts. Didn't he make great graphs? You go, Father Larry.
Yeah, I have to confess, I'm a data guy, I'm a numbers guy, I'm a chart guy. So we thought the best way of showing this information from the task force, which, remember, came from the diocese telling us, here are things that you've got to consider, and here's the way we want to rank them. Anytime this goes on in the diocese, they use this method of doing things so that we consistently look at our parishes. So we said, okay, let's look at it using a pie chart. So if you look at the pie chart, the numbers that you'll see will be sorted, starting from 12 o'clock and moving around clockwise. It goes from bigger to smaller, because remember, big numbers are a better rating, small numbers are a weaker rating. So when we looked at the sum of everything the task force did, here are the results we got. We see that we have 3 of our sites that scored 4 or higher on the 5-point scale. One of them was slightly higher than the other 2. The other 2 were right next to each other. Those three provided our first cluster. Then as we look at them, we see there were another two of our sites that were a full point less on the scale. And on a 5-point scale, 1 point is a pretty big deal. So two of our sites then were on a tier where their numbers came in at about 3. And then finally, one of our sites had a significantly lower rating based on all of these things brought together. So when we look at all of these, here's how it shook out. When we look at the results from the task force, as they evaluated our buildings based on these 4 categories, St. Bernadette came out with a rating of 4.3. North American Martyrs and St. Susanna were right behind at around 4.1. Then when we go down to the next tier of ratings, St. Bart's and St. Gerard were in about that 3 out of 5 range. And then when we looked at the facilities at St. Michael's, it came in at just under 2. So those were the results that the task force gave us. Now remember, our solution, our proposal doesn't just come from one thing. It's not that Father Tom and I look at these numbers and said, that's absolutely our choice. It's an important part. The task force did a wonderful job. They acted with courage and integrity and honesty, and they gave us something to work with. And so we thought these were useful data points for us to consider. But as Father Tom and I started looking at it, all of the data from the task force, from what Pastoral Council and Finance Council said to us when they looked at this info, it seemed to us that there were 3 considerations that we needed to look at as we came towards a tentative proposal. First of all, financial realities. Second of all, sensitivity to our geography. And third, the demographic distribution of the people in the parish. The financial realities are pretty straightforward. We've talked about them a number of times. This year we're expecting that we are going to spend $330,000 more than we bring in donations. As we look at last year, if the federal government hadn't thrown $250,000 in our lap, the amount of donations that came in weren't even sufficient enough to support a single location. Now, what we've been doing over the past couple of years, and I have to admit, Jerry, our business manager, and Tim, our maintenance coordinator, have been doing wonderful work helping us contain our expenses, right? Hey, this is my grandfather would always say, turn off the lights, close the door. Am I heating all of West Mifflin or what? And they've been doing a wonderful job working at bringing those expenses down. We also went through 2 rounds of staff realignment. We had 6 offices and 6 staffs worth of people. And we've probably cut 2/3 of the employees that we had, right? We consolidated. We went from 6 offices down to 1. To tell you the truth, we're kind of understaffed right now, right? Our employees are stressed. I would love to have the wherewithal maybe to hire 3, maybe 4 more people, but we are kind of operating right now, right? At rock bottom, at a bare minimum of what we need. The thing is, you can only save on expenses so much. You can only turn down the heat so much. You can only turn down the light so much. And I think we've reached the point where we said we have gained the maximum benefit from those kinds of things. Now, we've done great stuff. Remember, when we came in at about 2018, 2019, our deficit wasn't the $350,000 it was last year. It was more like $600,000. We have already knocked off about $250,000 each year in expenses, but we think we've reached the limit of cost reductions. And what that tells us is that the only way to reach a sustainable situation is to make our footprint smaller, to own fewer buildings so that we don't have the operations and maintenance costs that are currently things that are just, we're drowning. So for Father Tom and I, as we looked at all of the data that the task force gave us, that the councils gave us, this is how we framed up the question. We also mentioned that geographical sensitivity is important, right? We have essentially 2 clusters in our parish. We've got a Monroeville poll, and we've got a Penn Hills poll, by and large, right? And, when you merge a parish, you really have to make a big effort to bring everybody together so that they stop thinking of themselves as living in that neighborhood or that neighborhood or this neighborhood or this neighborhood, and instead to think of us as one big parish family. And to be honest, when we merged in January 2020, COVID really did a number on us, right? We just haven't had the chance to coalesce in that way, to come together in that way. And so, as we look at our situation, Monroeville is Monroeville and Penn Hills is Penn Hills, right? We would love it to see that we were coming together a little better, but we're just not there yet. And we just have to acknowledge that reality. We also notice, though, that means that there really does continue to be a need for ministry in Penn Hills, right? It's not like we are only Monroeville or Monroeville and Pitcairn. Penn Hills is an important part of who we are, so we wanted to be sensitive to that dynamic. One other thing that we would really want to mention is, as we look at the numbers of people, remember when we had the Parish Assembly back in 2019, when there were 3,000 people coming to Mass every weekend, we said, oh, well, about 3/4 of that 3,000 people are coming to Masses in Monroeville, and about 1/4 of that number were people coming in Penn Hills. So we went back and revisited that number. We looked at the number of people coming. Once we increased our capacity, remember we were seating every 3 rows and we changed to every other row? Well, since that time, our RSVPs for Masses have only been filling 80%. So it's not like we've blown out the capacity of any of our places. So we thought it would be a good measure to ask how many people were coming, and what we found was that for every person who comes to Mass at Penn Hills, 2 people are coming at Monroeville. So we still do have that little bit of disparity there. And the real difficult decision that we have to make is which of these 2 dynamics is going to drive our decision. The fact that there are more people today in Penn Hills than Monroeville who are practicing Catholics who are participating with us, or the fact that there are people in Penn Hills, good and committed Catholics, and we need to minister to them. That's where the question comes down to. So, as Father Tom and I prayed over that problem, because it's a real question, right? There's no slam dunk answer there. We said, okay, as we look at it and as we pray about it, there's probably an approach that has 2 parts to it. We think we can move forward with 2 church sites. We think that we can be stable with 2 church sites. 1 is insufficient, 3 looks like something that we can't afford. And we said, we think it's important to maintain a presence in Penn Hills, right? We looked at the amount of time it would take to get to Mass. And one way to look at it is, if you're going to one of our churches now, how much additional time would it take you to go to a different church? And if we have a church in Monroeville and a church in Penn Hills, then what that comes down to is what we're saying. If you have to go to a different church in Monroeville, or you're in Penn Hills and you have to go to a different church in Penn Hills, then that at the very most, would be asking you to drive an extra 2 miles, to take an extra 5 minutes to get there. But if you're in Penn Hills and all the churches in Penn Hills are closed, then that would be asking people to drive an extra 20 minutes to get to Mass. And that would feel like us abandoning the Penn Hill segment of our community. And Father Tom and I thought that that really wasn't an approach that in all Christian charity that we could make. With that in mind, here's the proposal we want to come up to you with as a tentative proposal. We want to suggest that we move forward with 2 sites, 1 in Monroeville, 1 in Penn Hills, St. Bernadette in Monroeville and St. Susanna in Penn Hills. Now we want to take a minute with this and not rush through it, because this is something that has real impact. We're talking about places where you have lived your faith life. Like we said earlier, where your kids were baptized, where you've been going to Mass every week, it is very difficult. It is very unhappy to say that we are suggesting that perhaps we aren't able to keep that building that you love so much open. And I get it. See, I grew up over by Kennywood. You know, Duquesne, West Mifflin, right in the shadow of the steel mills. And so when the steel industry took its downturn, it affected my family, my friends, uncles, big brothers. The same exact thing happened there that's been happening to us here. It's a dynamic that is happening throughout the diocese, throughout the state, throughout the Rust Belt. And my parish, the place where I was confirmed, the place where I was in the wedding party for my brother and his wife's wedding, the place where they baptized their kids and I became a godfather, that place isn't being used. I get it. It's hard, it's sad, and it's not at all pleasant. But our goal is to provide an environment where this parish community can thrive. Because our alternative is to spend all of our money until we're broke and cannot even support one church building. Father Tom and I agree we can't let that happen. We have to create a sustainable situation, and as difficult as that is, we think this is the proposal that can make that work.